Write what you know is probably the most ubiquitous piece of writing advice out there, and it's an enduring one for both amateur and professional creatives. You could fill an entire day, or at least an overlong video essay, talking about all the pieces of literature or music or film that are people quite literally writing what they know, setting their creative works in fictional worlds that they are familiar with from their own lives and using characters that are based on real people they've known. But as those of us who wasted thousands of pounds on art degrees know, write what you know doesn't have to be taken so literally. In fact, it shouldn't be. Otherwise we would have never gotten fantastical out there franchises like Star Wars, Star Trek, or Doctor Who. Yeah, that's a good point actually. Anyway, here's why, I don't know, Bluey is woke propaganda. For most media, its strength comes from the people behind it writing what they emotionally know, rather than drawing more literally on their life experiences. Someone recalling the memory of meeting their partner to write a rom-com, someone working through their daddy issues in a science fiction setting, James Cameron wanting to make out with the ocean really badly. Which brings us to Wes Anderson. It's very common for filmmakers to revisit themes in their works, exploring them with new characters and from new angles, and I think that Wes is obsessed with the theme of grief to a degree that few other filmmakers are. In one way or another, it always plays a major thematic role in his films. He also often gets unfairly accused of being an emotionally distant filmmaker who favours exclusively deadpan deliveries, of being all flash and no substance with his meticulously crafted sets and deliberately framed symmetrical shots. But I think that's part of Wes writing what he knows. I want to look today at how he has deliberately chosen to explore grief over and over again in this slightly detached way, and also how his latest film Asteroid City is the culmination of a decades-long grappling with that recurring theme and presentation style. You know, a real video essayist would have sat directly in the middle of the frame and dressed all in pastels and shit like that, but this is the AERØHEAD channel, my friends. It's reheated surface level analysis and unnecessary Doctor Who references all day, every day, and don't we just love it, folks? I'm really going to do it this time. But for a moment, my friends, just imagine you're, I don't know, a humble stop-motion farmer just trying to keep the things he cares about private and secure. And then imagine that one day you find out that's all been stolen out right from under you by some sly, data-brokering, also stop-motion animated fox. Your full name, your address, your medical records, the number of chickens you have, all the stuff that you care about the most. And now imagine that you're not stop-motion animated and that it's all being sold by humans in the real world instead of foxes, and you'll understand why I've got to tell you about today's sponsor, Aura. Aura is a service that will show you which which brokers are selling your information and will automatically submit opt-out requests for you. This reduces the amount of spam you have to deal with and helps protect you from hackers who want to steal your banking info, social media accounts, or other sensitive information that you don't want people seeing. Plus, the protection doesn't stop there. You and your whole family get antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more. Oh, Owen, does that mean I have to download 6 separate things? Nuh-uh. Aura does it all in one app at one affordable price. How affordable? That affordable. Read it and weep, buddy. With joy. If you click the link in the description or just type in aura.com/OROWEN, you can claim your 2-week free trial right now and see firsthand the peace of mind that Aura can give you. Happy browsing, and thanks to Aura for sponsoring this video. Back to you, Owen. Oh, that's me. Okay, I don't know. Why don't we get started with Part 1, a brief Wes story, except obviously something a little bit more imaginative. All of Wes Anderson's films, barring his first one, which I will come back to later, feature characters who have had someone close to them die, often quite recently. The beginning of their character journeys is always informed by this loss, and the beginning of our understanding of them as characters begins with seeing how they react to this grief. Chaz Tenenbaum forcing his sons into rigorous safety drills after the death of his wife, Steve Zissou single-mindedly hunting down the shark that killed his former partner, M. Gustave's reaction to the death and subsequent will reading of his longtime friend, or even his lack thereof after a certain point. It's another very old piece of writing advice that putting your characters in a crisis is the best way to reveal who they really are, and Wes is certainly a filmmaker who enjoys starting out with the crisis. And these are just examples of more immediate grief that more immediately inform the plot and characters. We can consider also background grief. That's what living in England for 26 years gets you, that and this concussion of an accent. The brothers in the Darjeeling Limited who last saw each other at their father's funeral a year ago, the orphan Sam Shakusky in Moonrise Kingdom, Max Fisher and his dead mother. The grief for all these characters is not as immediate. They have all passed the socially acceptable mourning period, as it were, and most of them are determined to prove that they have moved on in some way, either through reconnecting with their brothers or achieving academic excellence or abandoning polite society completely. But those of us who have gone through that kind of all-encompassing grief know that you don't ever really move on, despite most of these characters doing their best to delude themselves into thinking they have. To take it a little bit further, these characters also almost always exhibit a longing for a previous status quo. They deny the new order of things that has resulted from death by trying to preserve everything else around them. I briefly mentioned that Wes's first film, Bottle Rocket, doesn't directly have any grieving characters, but we can see that Dignan, Owen Wilson's character, is very resistant to the idea of Luke Wilson changing. He wants them to immediately return to a life of crime when Wilson leaves the mental hospital that he was staying in. Often a return to childhood is the specific brand of yearning for the past on offer. Owen Wilson wants his relationship with his brothers to be like it was when they were kids. Royal Tenenbaum wants the family to be one unit again. But it is definitely at its most explicit in Moonrise Kingdom, a movie starring and about children. The film is set in the mid-60s, and even as Sam and Susie make their plans to run away and spend their lives together, we are told by the narrator that a storm will strike the island they live on in 3 days' time. These two have had far from innocence-filled childhoods, but even what little of that innocence they've been able to find in each other is coming to an end. The film concludes with the storm washing away the titular cove where they built their little home away from it all. Adulthood, the real world, is here whether they like it or not, and childhood is never coming back. The narrator essentially acts as a big flashing neon sign reading, "This is a work of fiction," which I sometimes see brought up as another criticism of Wes's work, that he is obsessed with reminding audiences that what they are watching is not real. I'll dig into this more a little later, but let's put a pin in that for now. Oh no. For the moment, I want to go back to when I alluded to how Wes often gets accused of only writing characters who communicate exclusively in deadpan and don't often express big emotions, which, first of all, quite simply isn't true if you actually sit through his films, and secondly, for the characters who are like that, it's because they are deliberately projecting a facade. At the end of the second act, I heard you think Dark Knight of the Soul just now, f***ing dork, film Twitter user. Bet you've already got your think piece about Barbie ready to go, don't you? Don't read that. At the end of Wes's second acts, usually the point in a story where things look at their worst for the characters, when things are at their saddest emotionally, that's when the mask finally drops. The characters are forced to remove the armour of their twee little eccentricities that form a large part of Wes's creative identity, and they become real people. Up until this point, they've almost always felt a little bit larger than life, and this is always the moment when they become real. When, personally for me at least, their struggles with grief really hit home. Because I think, again, those who have gone through grief, not me though, I was joking, I'm actually built different, skill issue, may know how eventually if you bottle those feelings up, if you put on a kind of show for the people around you to indicate that you're fine, actually, eventually how you really feel is all gonna come out whether you like it or not. Again, I wouldn't know, built different, she grief on my sorrow until I think of Max conceding totally in his little competition with Herman Bloom and deciding to skip school to resign himself to working in his father's barbershop instead. The brothers in Darjeeling getting into a physical fight so bad that they get thrown off the train and vow to go their separate ways. Richie Tenenbaum getting the whole video demonetized real quick if I show what he does.
Kids, could you lighten up a little?
It's only when our heroes get so exhausted from carrying all the feelings about their grief around, so tired from the usually around 90-minute performance they've been putting on, that the people around them can see who they really are and can start to truly help them. Max literally meets Herman at his mother's grave to tell him that it's Jova, and Herman also opens up to him, allowing them both to end their feud and heal. The brothers reconcile, with one of them confessing that an accident they had was actually a suicide attempt, and they literally drop their dead father's baggage on the train station platform and ride away from it, in case you needed a little extra whack over the head with that one. I don't know what happened to the Tenenbaums, I fell asleep because there were no superheroes in it, but I would imagine that all of the children learn to mature in their own separate ways, and that especially Chaz being by his father's side for his death indicates that he will be able to handle this grief in a far healthier way than he did with his wife's. I don't know for sure though, because I just turned on one of those Baby Century videos instead. I guess I'm just not a fan of films based on books. I mean, it must be based on a book. Why else would it have chapters in it? I asked you a question. You're just going to sit there and stare at me. I have to do all the work around here. Again, you know, nobody ever helps me around this damn house, and I am sick of it. Also, Wes has become a pretty easy director to parody because of how distinct his visual style is. Very deliberately framed shots, often with pinpoint symmetry and pastel colours both in the set and in the costume design. And not to lump every Wes Anderson disliker into one box, you're allowed to not like a director for actual reasons, but I think a lot of the criticism for him comes from that visual style giving a lot of people a knee-jerk reaction of pretension. Once again, the fear that it will be just like me meeting you in a dark alleyway, all flash and no substance. And in the same way that how he writes dialogue often creates a certain distance between audience and character, his framing devices often do the same. The theatre curtains in Rushmore, the book chapters in Tenenbaums, the aforementioned narrator in Moonrise Kingdom. Where a lot of other American filmmakers, especially in the modern day, will do whatever they can to hide the artifice to immerse the audience fully in the world of the story, Wes never allows his audience to fully enter his story worlds. The fake nature of the characters' personas extends to that world around them, and Wes has been getting more and more confident with this with each passing film. Until finally, last year, we get this as almost the very first line.
Asteroid City does not exist.
Asteroid City has all of the hallmarks we've come to expect from Wes's work, grief of course being a central theme yet again, most tangibly with Jason Schwartzman's character, or a character within a character I'll explain in a second. Specifically the fact that early on in the movie, Schwartzman explains to his children that their mother passed away 3 weeks ago, so we also have that usual denial of a changed status quo in the wake of death. Wes once again emphasizes this grief, this longing to return to the past by setting the play in the past, specifically the 1950s, and drenching the story in an atomic age aesthetic. One of the major themes throughout is the loss of an innocent age of discovery, imagined or otherwise. The children's science competition, which brings the cast of characters together, seems to have been entirely judged on the basis of whether or not the inventions have military applications for any possible escalation of the Cold War. Atomic bomb tests frequently go off nearby, with all of the residents of Asteroid City well within the radius required to get a substantial dose of radiation from them, and they don't even know. A new world has arrived, emphasized even further by the alien arriving, and a lot of the people witnessing this have a certain lack of reaction. Once again, Wes's signature deadpan is used to show how most of the adults in this story only care about getting to go home, and not about the seismic societal shifts that are taking place in front of them, both extraterrestrial and otherwise. Again, they've left the past already, and they don't even know it. Or, in actuality, they haven't. Not really. Because, as we have already established, Asteroid City does not exist. This science competition plot is explicitly fictional, a play put on by actors, a writer, and a director who received just as much focus as their made-up story in the most Wesy "You are watching a made-up story, by the way" he's ever done. But why would he do this? Why turn everything up to 11 with this one and look inward so explicitly?
It wasn't rhetorical.
Jesus. I think for creatives that are, to be polite, getting on a bit, there are often two potential ways they can go with their work. They can either disappear completely up their own asses, refuse to accept any criticism of their output from 20 years ago, and coast on the goodwill from those old projects until they die and the Variety headline has to chuck the word controversial in there somewhere. Or they can choose to actually have some self-awareness and let their newer output ask interesting and hard to answer questions about their career and the themes they've spent that career interrogating. Consider our old pal Marty Scorsese and the 1-2 punch of The Irishman and Killers of the Flower Moon. The former coming from a place of awareness of how Scorsese's previous gangster films are often accused of glorifying a mafia lifestyle. Through eschewing the filmmaking techniques he used in those movies, punchy camera movements, big and over the top characters, needle drops that hit just at the right moment to make me rock hard, he uses a much more subdued style with zero flash behind it, making sure that this time the audience is truly beaten over the head with the fact that a life of soulless violence can only end in one of two ways: an early death or a lonely one. Killers, meanwhile, is painfully aware that it is condemning the criminal violence it depicts while also turning that criminal violence into entertainment for the masses. Scorsese even appears himself in the final scene where the genocide of the Osage people is being turned into true crime entertainment, metatextually implicating himself in this analysis and refusing to excuse himself from the question of should this movie have been made at all. Wes's ambitions are a lot more personal, meanwhile. As I said, his usual realm is grief and how people respond to it. But Asteroid City proves that even after over 20 years of making films that are informed by it,
I still don't understand the play.
His confession, in my opinion, with Asteroid City is that he has used most of these films as a kind of safe space to explore the grief he has felt in his life. Not to get too parasocial with it or anything, but he has certainly been preoccupied with death for a while now. I think, like many creatives, he wants to be able to make a definitive statement on this kind of emotion. A story that clearly indicates what it is and how to deal with it and overcome it. But the problem once again is that Asteroid City does not exist. Movies, or at least the ones with screenplays, are not real life. Even the most realistic narratives have fake characters, fake sets, all carefully curated so that someone can say something. Or at least that's what the good ones try to do anyway. All of Wes's previous movies have been aware of this, but Asteroid City is the first one to have a character quite literally storm out of the plot to confront the director about how none of this makes any sense to them. We actually, as an audience, miss a fair chunk of the fictional play Asteroid City's conclusion because Jason Schwartzman is having an existential crisis to Adrian Brody, and I understand why that could put some people off. It is a big creative swing. And getting even more parasocial here, I think the COVID-19 pandemic played a big part in this one. For most people, such a feeling of grief on that big of a scale had never been felt before, and I think we're still struggling to wrap our heads around it, trying to follow the natural human urge to find any meaning at all in such senseless death. Wes actually spoke about how the pandemic inspired the movie. The whole thing does largely centre around a quarantine, after all. In fact, a few of the adults demanding that the government let them leave regardless of the consequences to the outside world, while only the children realise how much things have changed, does make a lot of sense as a COVID allegory. I could go a little more into that, but that would be getting off topic, and I always make sure to keep things 100% focused on this channel. Anyway, fans of Doctor Who Series 7 should have their human rights revoked, and here's why. But to come back to the whole character stepping out the story to question the story thing. I think the way I've seen some people characterize this as a faux intellectual screed along the lines of "everything is fake, man, stories aren't real, you child, touch grass," is to once again assume that Wes is an unemotional and pretentious filmmaker. Because yes, you have someone shattering the fourth wall of the story by stepping out of the main plot of the movie to tell the director that he doesn't understand the play, but what does that director reply with?
Doesn't matter. Just keep telling the story.
This is the moment in every other Wes film where the facade breaks and the characters can finally become real people. But in Asteroid City, it's more like an acceptance that none of these characters are real people. They never have been. And just in the way that this artifice is dialed up, I understand how it could in turn dial up the apathy in certain audience members. The movie seems to be more detached than ever from its own plot. Why should anyone care? It's a complex question, but I think the beauty of Asteroid City is that Wes finds a very simple answer. After conversing with the director, Schwartzman heads out for a smoke break on the balcony and runs into an actress who was cast to play his dead wife in Asteroid City before being cut last minute. She recites dialogue to him that no longer exists, dialogue from a dream sequence where his character in the play meets his dead wife on the planet Mars, the very height of fake and scripted comforts. But it does comfort Schwartzman. He returns to the play re-energized, and we see the conclusion of the story. How many of us, when we were locked inside our homes in a pretty scary time, turned to stories to comfort us? Either dusting off old favourites or discovering new ones. No, most of them weren't real. Not even Tiger King, I don't think. I never watched it. It never got that bad for me. But them being real didn't, and to be honest, never has mattered. Schwartzman's son has won the contest. He has bonded with his father-in-law and is finally ready to deal with the grief of his wife's death in a healthy way. It's not real. None of Wes's stories have been real, and it's not like we didn't know that. But I think what I've always liked so much about his films is that willingness of his to show what's behind the curtain and remind us that fiction, unapologetically made up tales, are not, just because the specific events never really happened, somehow a lesser device for delivering a message to an audience than fact. Even if that message is just, that's okay, I don't know either. Asteroid City does not exist, but the people watching it do, and they're the ones who get to keep telling the story. This video was made possible by all of my patrons. Thank you so much for your support. And an extra special thanks to Flames of James, Sam by Night, Fifi M, DJB13, Nbyon Wee, Ben Pope, JOJ Matt, and Emma for subscribing at my highest tier. Thank you all for watching, and see you next time.